gentlemen, to another edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast. My name is Chris Whittingham, joined as always by Ethan Skolnick. And Ethan, it is FSU week, so we're going to carry on with our I think we're covering every major professional sports team in town this week, because we've got our Dolphins-Canes episode from the weekend. We've got John Crotty, which aired yesterday. We've got our big Panthers preview coming up tomorrow. So we're covering it all here in the 5 Reasons Sports Podcast. Be sure to check out all the podcasts in the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us here at 5 Reasons Sports. But tomorrow we're talking to George Richards of The Athletic. Today, another guest from The Athletic. Manny Navarro is joining us to talk some Miami-FSU. Manny, appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me on again, guys.
You can find him still at Manny_Navarro, and then The Athletic MIA on Twitter. A bunch of our other friends have already appeared with us and have joined them. Orlando Alzagari, Chandel Richardson, Andre Fernandez, Chris Perkins is our only 3-time guest. Manny is now at 2 times. We'll see if Manny gets up there. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking to George Richards to preview the Panthers. So Manny is now back covering the team that he covered for several years. You may know him from his Heat coverage from the past 3 years, but moved back to the Miami Hurricanes this year. And obviously, we've got a lot to talk about with the Canes because they're playing the seventh best. They're playing the 7th best team in the state of Florida this weekend. I mean, if they were playing UCF, this would be a much bigger deal. UF also looks better than FSU. I don't know about FAU and FIU. We'll see. USF certainly does. FSU's not great right now. We're going to start with you there, Manny. They're not great. And they've got a new coach, and I feel like half of the country has fired the coach already. And so the question is this. This is a rivalry game. You do the whole throw out all the record stuff, and I know people talk like that, but FSU's just not very good this year. And so what does this mean for Miami? Because I'm looking at the rest of the schedule, and I see Virginia Tech, and they've already had a really bad loss. And I see a potential showdown with Clemson, depending on what Bryant's situation is and where Clemson is at that stage in the ACC championship game. I don't see a lot of other interesting games on the schedule. So what does it mean for Miami? Do they need to beat this team by 2 or 3 touchdowns?
Well, I think we've reached the level now with Mark Richt where if you're really going to be a different program than what it was under Al Golden and what it was under Randy Shannon and, towards the end of the Coker years, it's about beating the teams that you should beat. And this is an FSU team that Miami should beat. They're 12-point favorites in this game. And when you look at it on paper, Florida State, look, they've still got athletes. They've still got guys that are talented. They've got a defensive end, and Brian Burns is probably going to be a first-round pick. They've got playmakers at the receiver position. The 2 running backs are very, very talented. I think DeAndre Francois is a pretty good quarterback, but they're horrible up front on the offensive line. And this is a game that with Gerald Willis and Joe Jackson and some of the guys that you have in that front 7, this is a game that really, if you're the better team, if you've really grown as a program, this is a game that you win. This is a game that FSU won for years, right? When Miami was down and Miami didn't have the good offensive line or, the poor quarterback play. This is the time when Miami has to sort of put their foot on FSU's neck and say, okay, you got a new coach in Willie Taggart. Your offensive line is horrendous. We're more talented than you. We're better than you. We should win this game. And so I think if you're a Hurricanes fan, what you want to see this week is that Miami goes out. And I don't know if they have to win this game by 35 points, but certainly win it convincingly enough where you're not in the fourth quarter sweating, saying, oh, my God, can N'Kosi Perry make a throw here on 3rd down to help the Canes win this game? I think Miami's good enough where they should win this game comfortably, and you're saying to yourself, okay, you look at the rest of the schedule, there's no reason they can't run the table.
For me, the thing that is you look back at last year and the way that they won that game kind of informs the way that I'm going into this game, which is FSU was bad last year. And I think that kind of bore out over the course of their schedule. It took a massive beating away to Boston College, and eventually Jimbo Fisher left the program, and they had to schedule a makeup date from the Hurricane just to get to a bowl game. And Miami struggled to move the ball, get first downs on offense, and I think those kind of performances are at least in part why Malik Rozier has been swapped out. But we'll get to the quarterback position in a second. I just sort of wonder if Miami is really over going against that uniform, that logo, and have the games actually changed with Miami and FSU to where now Miami can be expected to not just win the game or have a chance to win the game, but actually dominate in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the hope is, right? You would hope that they get back to that level. There were certainly years when Miami was at its best that they would dominate FSU even when FSU was good. I don't think the Hurricanes are to that level yet, Chris, where they're going to come out and dominate a rival like Florida State. I think FSU still has good enough athletes in this game to make it interesting, to make you want to watch this game. But I think certainly in year 3 of the Mark Richt era, where he's now had, 3 recruiting classes, he's had time for those linebackers to grow up. He's been able to groom some of his own recruits and certainly finally has his own quarterback under center. This is the year where you say to yourself, you know what? Miami took enough butt whippings from FSU over the years. This is the year where you flip the script and now you sort of take advantage when the Seminoles are down. And I think, you look at last year's game, you're right. I mean, it literally came down to Darrell Langham coming up with a huge catch with 6 seconds left in the game for Miami to pull that out. It shouldn't have been that close considering how bad FSU was last year. But again, that's to me a sign of where the program was. Yes, Miami started 10-0 last year, but how many of those other games in the regular season did they struggle to win? Georgia Tech, for instance, the North Carolina game was nip and tuck. North Carolina was terrible, and they barely won on the road in Chapel Hill. So I think if you're Miami, last week you go out, you beat a not very good North Carolina team soundly. You handle FIU for the most part a couple weeks ago. You go on the road to Toledo, you win. Even though it was a little hairy there in the first half, you still win that game pretty comfortably. I think that's the trend that you want to see if you're a Miami Hurricanes fan. You want to see this team continue to at least win games where you're not sweating it out in the fourth quarter. And that's a big difference from last year, and to me, that's a step forward.
What would you say that Miami fans and sort of the Miami community writ large has learned about this team in the aftermath of the LSU game? Obviously, the quarterback change is massive. We'll get to that next. But for me, the fact that LSU is really good and that this team is really good, that this roster, which at times really struggled to cope with LSU's size in that game and LSU's overall athleticism, I think Miami has shown themselves that they're kind of at that level. And I think that they would expect that if they played that game again, they would be much more competitive.
Yeah, I think what we've learned, Chris, is that this is a legitimate top 25 team, a team that maybe is even worthy of really being in the top 15. I think the preseason expectations starting off number 8, you still have the same quarterback under center who had struggled through the first, through the last few games of the season. You had an offensive line that was being completely redone. And yeah, it was 33-3 in the fourth quarter. I think if Miami and LSU were to play today, I don't know who I would pick. And LSU's obviously proven to be a pretty good team. They're in the top 10. They did have an impressive win on the road at Auburn. So, I think what we've learned about this team is that, look, okay, maybe they shouldn't have been ranked 8th in the preseason, but they're certainly worthy of being in the top 25, certainly worthy of being right there outside of the top 15. And in terms of talent, I mean, you've seen it, especially at the receiver position. A guy like Amon Richards goes down in the first half of that game, and yet it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. You're still getting tremendous play out of your receivers. Jeff Thomas has been phenomenal. Mike Harley came in when Jeff Thomas got hurt in the FIU game and played well. Lawrence Cager's been solid for them. This is when you start to go back to being an elite program or a team that's really a contender year in and year out. It's really about depth. It's not about just the stars, the big names that you might have at one position here or there. We went through the years where you had the Duke Johnsons and you had the Sean Spence on defense. Now you're really beginning to build some depth, and I think that's what you're starting to see with this Hurricanes team.
Manny, before we transition to the quarterback situation, because we want to focus on it a little bit, can you in a short answer tell us what's happened to FSU in your judgment?
Well, I mean, look, you go through a coaching change, and look, Jimbo, his last couple years, you look at what was going on there. He had coaches that were leaving for other programs, taking better jobs. So little by little, his coaching staff was getting picked off. And what's happened to them this year is just they've got probably one of the worst offensive lines in all of college football. It's a complete and total mess at that position. I went through Pro Football Focus's grading system, and literally they don't have an offensive tackle rated higher than 103 out of 150 qualified offensive tackles when it comes to grading. I mean, that's literally their highest rated guy is their starting left tackle. He's 103rd. And this is among Power 5 conference schools. And so, when you were that bad at such an important position, you're not going to win most Saturdays. And the fact that they were able to pull off the win in Louisville Saturday was impressive to me. That was more of a DeAndre Francois taking advantage of an opportunity. And so, look, I think what's happened to them is just whenever you go through coaching changes, whenever you fire a coach or the coach leaves for another program, you're going to have that year where it's going to take a while to sort of piece everything together. they're still Florida State. I think in 2 years they're going to be back to being one of the better teams in the ACC again.
All right, let's move on to part two here. We talked about this a little bit, but obviously this has been the thing that Canes fans were waiting for, was the quarterback change, and now some are wondering why it wasn't done sooner and if that would have mattered against LSU. But to be honest, I mean, Perry has been up and down so far when he's gotten some opportunity. Like, you can see the potential. You can see the way it changes, the way the defense has to play, but he's hardly been perfect. So where are you on him, and what kind of game does he need to play on Saturday?
Well, when I first came back on the beat about 2 weeks before the season started, I started asking people about, why is Malik still the quarterback? And the answer I kept getting from everybody around the program was, well, nobody's ready. Nikosi's not ready. He can't read defenses. He's a guy who dominates practice. He can go out there. He's got the strongest arm. He's the most athletic guy, but we can't trust him. We can't put him in the game because he can't read defenses. That's the overwhelming response I got from just about everybody I spoke to, even Nikosi's high school coach. And what I find amazing is that all of a sudden you put him out there against FIU and even last week, and you start to see a guy who everything you heard about was true as far as what he was in practice. Extremely accurate, tremendous arm, tremendous athleticism. I think what we haven't seen yet is reading the defenses. And I think a lot of that is what we're going to see this Saturday against Florida State. What kind of schemes are they going to throw at him? How complex they're going to be? How much pressure is he going to face? Look, let's face it, against FIU, against North Carolina, he wasn't facing tremendous pass rushes. I mean, if you compare the numbers between him and Malik, Nikosi's, I think, faced pressure on 20% of his dropbacks. Malik is somewhere around 38%. So obviously Malik had the tougher schedule. He had to play against LSU. Nikosi didn't. So that's what we're going to see Saturday. We're going to see how far along he's come as far as being able to read defenses and make smart decisions. There have been times already where he's shown you he will make the dumb decision. He will throw the 60-yard heave downfield when there's no play. He will throw the ball into double coverage like he did against North Carolina. Even though it was a very nice pass and he fit it in a nice tight window, it was a bad decision to throw that into double coverage. He didn't have to do that. It wasn't 3rd down and 10. It was like 2nd down, and he's trying to force the ball in there. So I think that's what we're going to have to watch here as the season progresses. Does Nikosi Perry take that next step up? Can he read defenses and make the right decisions? And what is he like when he's really facing the pressure? I think, without question, we know that he's a far more accurate passer than Malik is. Even when Malik wasn't under pressure, there were many opportunities that he had where he just couldn't get the ball where it needed to go. Nikosi's touch has just been really, really impressive. I thought the touchdown pass against North Carolina was just perfectly placed. He had one against FIU where he threw it right over the top to Brevin Jordan in the end zone, perfectly placed ball. He is by far a superior quarterback in terms of accuracy and touch. But again, it's going to always come down to, do you make the right decisions? And that's what separates the quarterbacks who make it into the NFL and the ones who are just good college quarterbacks. So that'll be the test for Nikosi.
This is a dorky scouts phrase, but you can see his arm talent, like the accuracy and the strength and the zip. It just looks entirely different. But I agree with you. I don't think, first off, the 2 games that he's played in have been kind of wonky. I think you look at the FIU game, I think he made a definite difference and was making some really impressive throws. And if they kept their foot on the gas in the 4th quarter, I think it would have continued to look as impressive. The North Carolina game was just strange. It was a strange game just by virtue of the fact that you have 3 defensive touchdowns and they weren't running the ball great at the beginning, but then when they did run the ball, they were running it for 50 yards at a time. And so there really wasn't any kind of real game scenario that you've seen Nikosi Perry put in. And that's why I find this game fascinating because, I mean, Florida State, albeit the fact that they're down and, they were losing to Samford and, that Louisville team is not any good. The team that they almost lost to away from home. So their defense isn't great, but it's still Florida State. They've got amazing athletes and even a down recruiting class for Jimbo are good. I'm really fascinated to see what it looks like for him because he hasn't really yet played in a normal game. And I guess my question would be, what happens if he struggles? Because are you going to go back to Malik Rozier? Are you under the impression that this is a permanent decision at the quarterbacking position for Miami?
Well, I think it's as permanent as long as Nikosi doesn't turn the ball over 4 or 5 times. I think obviously I think Mark Richt is ready for him to struggle a little bit. I don't think he expects it to be totally easy for Nikosi. And I think he's sort of tried to prepare the media for it, saying, look, Malik is still there. Obviously, we went into last week's game against Carolina without him really formally announcing Nikosi as the starter. So I think the only way back into the game is if Perry gets hurt or if he completely bombs. I think at this point, the torch has been passed. The ball's in Nikosi's court now to just hold the ball and be steady. I mean, look, the bottom line is FSU might be one of the toughest games left on the schedule for Miami before the ACC championship game. And they're supposed to win this game by 2 touchdowns. So I think as long as Nkosi just does what he's supposed to do, which a lot of the time will be turning around and handing the ball off to DJ Dallas and Travis Homer. I think as long as he does those things, he's going to stay with his job, even if he does make a few mistakes.
All right, we'll get back to our podcast here with Manny Navarro in a second, but we've got a great promotion that is tied to this game. So all of you Canes fans, all of you Noles fans, however many of you still exist this season, we're going to get you on betdsi.com. Now, we've been telling you about going there and using our code REASON101 to get your deposit matched up to $2,500, your initial deposit. But now we've got something tied directly to this game. So here's all you've got to do. Use the code either Miami or FSU to sign up. Now, whichever team that you think is going to win this game. When you register using that promo code, Chris, Miami or FSU, and you risk up to $100 on the wager, if you lose the wager, they're refunding you the money. So you've got absolutely nothing to lose.
That's right, Ethan. Up to $100 if you wager on the game, you'll get it back. So it's basically, you get a free chance, a free swing to see if you can correctly predict whether Miami or FSU are going to win the game, and then you can take that money and bet more with it. So, again, nothing to lose by betting over at betdsi.com. I'm having a fantastic experience betting over at betdsi.com. Enjoyed some Champions League betting over the last couple of days, and then the football season, now the baseball playoffs, you can wager on that as well. NBA season, not too far away either. So check it out over at betdsi.com. Again, use that promo code Miami or FSU, and you can get your money refunded if you lose that bet. So again, check it out, betdsi.com. Point spread right now is Miami minus 13.5 or minus 550 on the money line. Florida State 13.5 point underdogs or plus 407. So if you are an FSU fan that's really convinced that Miami could win, you can take a $100 swing on FSU winning, and then you can turn that into $500 if you're all right, or you get your $100 back. So betdsi.com, promo code Miami or FSU.
All right, Manny, let's move on to the next part of this because, again, so much focus on the quarterback, but the reality is that the defense has kind of, hyped it up to another level over the past couple of weeks. And you look at where they are in tackles for loss, as opposed to, again, you mentioned the offensive line for FSU, which is brutal. FSU's defense has not been creating those kind of plays. So is this the kind of game that we could be looking at? We're talking a lot about the quarterback and kind of what they do without Amon Richards, which I feel like Amon Richards at this stage is like the Devontae Parker of the Canes. It's just, I hate to say it because I feel bad for him because we were talking about him as a high first-round pick, and now with availability questions, I don't know where he's going to end up. But the defense to me is the big issue with the Canes because they're playing some teams. When you're recruiting players, often the hardest thing to fill out is a quality offensive line. It's hard to find 5 guys who not only are good at their particular positions, but when you put them together, they play well. And so when we see teams struggle, a lot of times it is because of the offensive line. You mentioned how bad FSU's is. So, isn't this a game we should expect the turnover chain 2 or 3 times? We should expect FSU to be held under 250 yards, a game that the Canes dominate defensively?
Yeah, I think that's a fair expectation in this game. And Gerald Willis, look, he's not coming off his best game. He had 2 really dumb penalties against North Carolina, and one of them that led to a touchdown, the only touchdown for North Carolina. So I think as long as Gerald Willis doesn't lose his mind and pick up stupid penalties, I think there's no reason he shouldn't dominate this game up front. FSU's had trouble running the ball against everybody this year, even though they've got 2 really good running backs. So I think this is the opportunity for Miami's defense to really shine, really dominate the Seminoles up front. That said, Willie Taggart is a very good offensive coach. I don't know that his system is perfectly in place right now for this FSU team because of the personnel that he has, but I think he's going to make some adjustments in this game, and I expect some surprises. I expect FSU to do some things that we haven't seen yet on film, and the question is, will Miami respond to that? One thing that I think you've seen this defense struggle against all year is when the quarterback takes off and runs for whatever reason. And, Joe Jackson, I asked him about this after the last game. I said, why are you guys sort of having these breakdowns where the quarterback's taking off for 15, 20 yards? And he says, well, we're just not staying in our assignments. Guys are sort of trying to get to the quarterback so badly that they leave these lanes open for the quarterbacks to slip through. And I think DeAndre Francois is not necessarily known for being a guy who takes off and runs all the time. But in this game, that could be the game plan. It could be, hey, let's see how much we can stretch Miami's defense out, sending our receivers deep, and then just letting DeAndre take off and run. So, look, Shaq Quarterman's health is going to be important in this game for Miami. He is their leading tackler. He's the guy who leads the middle of that defense. He's got a sore left ankle, so a sprained left ankle he's coming back from. Mark Richt said he went through practice today, but we're going to have to see what he's like on Saturday and how much pain he can honestly deal with. If he's out and you've got to go to somebody else who isn't part of that regular starting linebacker unit, that could present a problem for Miami. So I wouldn't say this is a slam dunk for the Hurricanes defense, but certainly going in, if Shaq Quarterman is healthy and you get Jaquan Johnson back, I would have to say Miami should win this competition here between FSU's offense and Miami's defense.
But in terms of the things that Miami has not been great at defensively, and I think you saw some of it in the North Carolina game, I mean, it's not like North Carolina didn't move the ball. They got into Miami territory 8 times, and unfortunately for them, 6 of them ended without points. But when teams are moving the ball against Miami, it does seem to be that they turn their aggression against them. Opposing offense can use the way that they're chasing tackles for losses and turnovers, which seems to be the way that Miami wants to play defense, and they turn it against them. Now, it's worked to pretty reasonable success for the Hurricanes in the aftermath of the LSU game, the way that they're playing defensively, but you can get yards against Miami. What would you say those weaknesses are?
Yeah, certainly what I talked about earlier as far as the quarterbacks being able to escape the pocket and pick up yards. I think teams that line up with 3 running backs in the backfield, which is what you saw North Carolina do some of, and forces Miami to play sort of this assignment defense where guys have to pick up, either the pitch man or the quarterback. You see some breakdowns with that. LSU, I think, that had a little bit of success with that at times in the opener. So, and then I think in the secondary, Michael Jackson had an elite season last year as a junior and decided to come back. I don't think he's played to the same level he was playing at last year. Trajan Bandy has been solid for them, but that third cornerback, there's been moments where Javonte Dean has been beaten in coverage. There's been times where the safeties have been sort of out of position. Quarterman has given up a few pass plays in coverage. So, I mean, I think this defense, their whole mindset is get in the backfield, be disruptive, put pressure on the quarterback, hit guys in the backfield, make it second and third and long. That's what their whole game plan is. If Miami is not doing that against Florida State, they could be in danger of losing this game.
All right, so for point 4 here, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I hate to do the Devontae Parker thing to him because I feel like Dolphin fans have forgotten Devontae's even on their team. Certainly Canes fans still realize Amon Richards is on their team, but going into last year, he was supposed to be the number 1 playmaker on offense, him or Mark Walton. And then obviously we saw what happened with Walton with the injury, and then Richards couldn't stay healthy. And then this year, again, it's been Jeff Thomas who's emerged as their number 1 threat, not Amon Richards, and Amon is not on the field this week. So with what they're doing at the skill spots now, with how we've seen the tight ends have reacted to the quarterback change, the young tight ends, with the way Jeff Thomas has played, with Homer or Dallas or one of their backs coming through at times, do you think they have enough at the skill positions, even if Amon Richards cannot be counted on the rest of the season?
Absolutely. I think they've recruited the receiver position, even the tight end position. I know there's only 2 healthy scholarship guys, but I think there's certainly enough there. It was a really smart decision to move DJ Dallas to running back. By the way, he's rated, among the best in the country. I wrote about him for The Athletic this week about that whole decision to move DJ Dallas from receiver to running back last season as a backup to Travis Homer. He has far outperformed Homer. In fact, among Power 5 conference running backs, he's number 2 in elusiveness, which is basically, being able to make plays downfield once your blockers aren't involved anymore. He's had 19 players miss tackles trying to get him, and Travis Homer just hasn't run the football as well as he did last year. So that was an important move. I think they certainly got enough depth with Lorenzo Lingard, the talented freshman. At the receiver position, you mentioned Thomas. I think Mike Harley's actually come up pretty huge. Basically, Jeff Thomas is back up in the slot. One thing they've done with Amon out is they put guys in different positions. Amon is sort of the X when Jeff is a slot guy, but Jeff has played a whole lot of the X this season. Mike Harley's gotten more play at the slot position, and both of those guys have been really, really effective. And I think when Brevin Jordan had the ball thrown his way, he's shown you that he could be one of the best tight ends in college football in a couple of years, and certainly a guy who has the pedigree maybe to be a first-round pick. So, look, there's so many guys that haven't even played yet at that receiver position. Brian Hightower, we saw him make a touchdown catch against LSU, but then you have Pope, Mark Pope, who was a 5-star kid locally out of Miami Southridge, who's a really uber talented player. He hasn't even been on the field yet. So if you're asking me, can Miami survive without Amon Richards? They certainly have so far, and I think they could going forward. There's so much talent and depth at those positions that I think Mark Richt has set himself up well here.
I just kind of find strange, though, that we're 5 games into the season and there's only 3 players with double-digit catches. Thomas at 13, Harley at 15, and Brevin Jordan at 13. You just, as much as there is that promise there, I feel like, and I don't mean to be harsh, but there's been promise of that position for a while, and it really hasn't been since, like, Alan Hearns was catching a bunch of passes, and he was on the same team, I think, as Malcolm Lewis, and they were a fairly reliable tandem. You just haven't seen a group of Miami receivers really emerge all at the same time in one season. Now, part of that is you throw 11 passes against North Carolina, and you're killing games off against Savannah State, and you're bringing a lot of guys through. But there hasn't been, in big games, and it's 3rd down and 7, who you throwing the ball to. I just don't know if that answer is readily available for this Hurricanes team.
Well, I disagree. I think that there's so many different guys who have come up with big catches already. That said, the majority of these games have been pretty much blowouts. I mean, since the LSU game, and I don't think, other than a few tense moments against Toledo, most of these games have just been out of hand. So we've seen this team run the football a bunch. I mean, I think the last 3 or 4 games, definitely the last 4 games, they've run for over 200 yards in each of those. So I think there just hasn't been the necessity yet, or the opportunity really, where either Malik Rozier or N'Kosi Perry's had to make too many tough 3rd down runs. And I think a big emphasis with all of that has been for Miami is making sure they have more success on 1st and 2nd down. They like getting into the 3rd and shorts, especially now that they have a fullback in Trayon Gray, and they like sort of running behind him on 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2. Last year that was a major problem for this team. So I think the reason you just haven't seen the 3rd and long is because it just hasn't happened very often.
We'll get back to our podcast here with Manny Navarro in a second, but we've talked to you a little bit about doing some betting. You would not bet on the stock market. You would not invest in stocks unless you knew something about the stocks you were investing in, right? So why would you bet on games unless you had the analytics? If you knew where the public was going with their money so you could make an informed decision. We're taking a look right now at this Dolphins-Bengals game coming up this Sunday. Obviously, Dolphins fans depressed. The team's 3-1, but they just got trashed in New England. They're playing a very good Cincinnati team on the road. Ryan Tannehill doesn't play particularly well on the road. Adam Gase doesn't coach well on the road. Man, I'm depressing you more. Anyway, Chris, what is the BetQL app, which you can download for free on Google Play for Android or iTunes for Apple? What is the BetQL app telling you about the Dolphins and the Bengals?
Not much better than what you were saying, Ethan. They right now have the public is betting this game 50-50, roughly thereabouts, at Bengals -6. So this line has been set well in terms of the betting public, but their rating on the game is that they think that Cincinnati should be favored by 11 and the Bengals are favored by 6. So if you follow their advice, you should be hammering the Cincinnati Bengals to not only win but cover the 6-point spread. They think that the Dolphins, particularly away from home, are not going to do well in this game. The line started at 5.5. I imagine some action came in on the Bengals after the Dolphins' performance against the Patriots. Bengals winning away from home in Atlanta. This is a really good Bengals team. The Dolphins are up against it, particularly in the minds of BetQL. And it's not just that game. They have you covered on the Red River Shootout this weekend between Texas and Oklahoma. And depending on your in-app purchases, can take a look at any game in either the college football, the NFL schedule. They've got baseball in there as well if you want to bet the Major League Baseball playoffs. So plenty of information available on BetQL. Again, go to the Apple App Store or go to the Google Play Store if you're on Android and download the BetQL app.
All right, let's get to the last part of this. And this is about the fans because during this rivalry, it always is. And there's been a really good home atmosphere at Hard Rock Stadium recently for the Canes. I think, for people who just look at it and say, nobody goes to the Canes games, that obviously has been different in the Mark Richt era, in terms of the Notre Dame game, but some of the other games that were not as hyped. And this one obviously is hyped no matter what FSU is. And what I've been saying all week, Manny, and Chris and I have talked about this a little on the pod that we did earlier in the week, was that the casual Canes fan, which is the majority of the Canes fans, right? Like, I mean,
right.
because the Canes base is not an alumni base to the same degree as FSU or UF. So you're talking about a lot of casual Canes fans who are kind of like, and as we joke, most of them went to FIU. But they're the ones who they kind of look at the team and like, oh, are they good? Okay, and they get excited about them. And for them, they don't really know the problems that FSU has had. Like, they may know the record, but they're not diving deep into it like we are here about their offensive line and the transition in coaches. So a Miami win over FSU is going to be celebrated, in my view, almost the same way by them as it always is. It's more to the hardcore Canes fans who may not, put as much stock in it. But what do you think that stadium is going to be like? And do you think it's going to be more Miami tilted than it typically is in this rivalry, just because, again, the Noles are just not very good?
Yeah, I mean, I've run into a lot of FSU fans, the casual FSU fans, because those exist as well, by the way, who, when they talk about the Seminoles, they just kind of, oh, God, this is a bad team. So I don't know how many Seminoles fans are going to make the trek down here, other than the ones that are already here in Miami and just want to go and get drunk and have a good time on Saturday. I tend to think they're mostly going to be UM and FIU students, right? They're going to be the ones that are cheering on the Canes. So I would tend to think this is going to be a pretty good crowd. 3:30 kickoff. I know it's hot, but at least it's not noon. And so I tend to think that this will be well attended. You can still go out and do what you want on Saturday night. I expect a pretty good crowd for this one, and I expect them to be loud because Miami should win this game. I mean, and the turnover chain should be out a few times. I think the atmosphere is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, and that for me is sort of the encouraging signs about this start. And frankly, I would say since Hard Rock Stadium underwent renovations, the University of Miami crowd has gotten a lot better, a lot louder, and a lot more regular. Like I saw you joked on Twitter in kind of the build up to the North Carolina game that, boy, there seems to be a lot of aqua in the crowd, and then it really filled in. And that it's really surprising to me that now even your run of the mill ACC games are well attended, because even when Miami is threatened to be good, I remember when I think they started 6-0 under Al Golden, they played Wake Forest at home before they played Florida State, and they were expecting a massive crowd, and then you look up and it's the usual sea of orange seats that there used to be at the stadium. And I think partially reducing capacity and then just the improvements to the stadium and Mark Richt taking over, this has kind of created a groundswell that now Miami gets a regularly great environment of noise and fans and atmosphere that just never existed, even in the glory days of this program.
Yeah, you're right, Chris. I mean, there were about 60,000 there for the North Carolina game on the Thursday night. About 20 minutes before kickoff, when I took that photo, there was probably 10,000. But we know from people that most of those guys don't get in until halftime, right? They're
right.
busy sneaking beers into the stadium. So I probably shouldn't have sent that tweet out. I know I angered some Hurricanes fans, but it was true. I mean, 20 minutes before kickoff was pretty embarrassing, but by the middle of the first quarter, it was respectable.
All right, last one here for Manny, and again, you can follow him at Manny_Navarro or at The Athletic MIA. He's now writing for The Athletic after years and years and years at the Miami Herald. So I posed this question on Twitter, and it was going one direction, this poll, and then the UCF Mafia took it over. They all woke up and just flooded us. And we do have a UCF podcast. We've relegated it to our patron feed, which is War on I-4 podcast. But obviously, if UCF wins the national championship again, as they did last year, then we'll make that a free feed. But UCF, Miami, Manny, right now, neutral field, who wins?
It's a great question. I'm rooting for that game so badly, and I think it could happen. I mean, why not make that the Peach Bowl this year, right? Why not have Miami and UCF play that game since Hard Rock can't host? They got one of the semifinals. I think if UCF doesn't go undefeated, which if they do, I think they deserve a shot at making the playoffs, then I think Miami should play UCF this year, assuming they're only a 2-loss team, having lost to Clemson in the ACC title game. I think if that's the way things pan out, I hope the selection committee does us all a favor and puts those teams on the field together. But right now, if you were to ask me who wins that game, I honestly have no clue.
Oh, cop out. Come on.
I honestly don't. I mean, I really respect what they've done, but I think this Miami team with N'Kosi Perry is totally different. And this week is going to tell us a lot. I think if N'Kosi looks good against a better FSU defense, against a real pass rush, because FSU does have a real pass rush, if he performs well against them, then I'd say Miami. I'd say Miami would win the UCF game. But if they still look like the Miami we've seen with Malik, where N'Kosi struggles, there's pressure on the quarterback, and he's turning the ball over, then I would certainly pick UCF. But I think a lot of my opinion would be based off of what we see from N'Kosi. I think that's why this game is so important. We need to see how good N'Kosi Perry really is.
Chris?
I think Miami's better. And I say that because they lost Shaquem Griffin, who goes to the Seahawks, who was their best defensive player from a year ago. I think you can score points on that team. And as much as UCF was able to move against Auburn, it was a lot less effortless than it is when they play opponents in the American. They still have their number one running back, and obviously they bring back Mackenzie Milton. It's a good team. It's a really good team. I just think that Miami, by virtue of having better athletes and a dominant defense that can slow them down a little bit, I think Miami would win the game.
We're going to send the UCF Mafia to both of you guys. As soon as we're done here, at War on I-4 podcast, if you're a UCF fan, they get into USF there too. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that FSU is the fifth best team in the state right now. I mean, certainly it's a stretch to maybe put FAU ahead of them. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, Oklahoma,
FAU just lost to Middle Tennessee, so I think we can comfortably say yes.
Right. Okay. And FIU, I think we can comfortably say yes. But the other four, I don't know. I mean, Florida's better than I was anticipating, even though I like Dan Mullen. All right. So again, follow him at Manny_Navarro. We appreciate your change in venue because it allowed you to come back on the podcast. So that was good for us. That's all I'll say on that. And we will talk to you soon.